So, the Apple Vision Pro dev kits are being provided by Apple for all developers to start developing, and you, as a designer, should be ready to design for them. But how? You ask me? So to get started, go to this link first. This will be down in the description below. You'll see these videos provided by Apple there. Out of all the videos, I would like you to check out these three first. So, Principles of Spatial Design, Designing for Spatial Input, and Designing for Spatial User Interfaces. So now I'll be giving you a quick summary of all these videos here, so just to get you started, and I'll be sharing some resources at the end of the video. So don't forget to watch the whole thing, and let's get started with Principles of Spatial Design. So in this video, they start by talking about how to keep things familiar with the interfaces that you're used to interact with, like sidebars, tab bars, search fields, and then they discuss about sizing and the point system. They use a glass material because it lets people be aware of their surroundings even while using the apps in the environment. And windows usually don't move around with you, they stick at one place. Choose whatever window size fits your content the best. Keep controls of the tab bars and the toolbars above the window, like in front of the window, so that they're always accessible. You can change the shape and the size of the windows as required. Keep the number of windows as low as possible so that you do not block people's view of their surrounding. Next, when a window is moved far, it grows in size and shrinks when you bring it close to you in order to keep the UI elements and the text usable and legible. Keep the field of view in mind while changing the size, and make sure you place the content where a person would be naturally looking at and they don't have to strain their necks to look at your content. Reduce movement required to interact with your app, and usually try to design experiences where people are usually stationary. One of the very interesting things about this new type of design is that you can show hierarchy using depth, which is completely new to this kind of design. Objects placed closer afford more interaction than the ones placed far. Interactable elements like buttons and menus should be placed closer to the user, and use light and shadows to make the experience feel more immersive. Use depth in subtle ways to show hierarchy. Like, let's suppose 3D text is very hard to read, so maybe just let the text be 2D unless you really need it to be 3D. There are different levels of immersion in Apple Vision Pro. It can be a windowed experience, a larger windowed experience which makes the pass-through opaque, or it can also be a full space experience which completely immerses you in a new environment. Use sounds to make this experiences feel more immersive, and keep things comfortable, like fading out when a person is moving and the UI fading in when the person becomes stationary again, and provide a very clear way of exiting those experiences. And lastly, make sure your experiences feel authentic, new, and fresh. Next is design with spatial user interface, and there they start with explaining how the app icons work and how they're made 3D. So the maximum amount of layers available for the app icon is 3, and there would be a background layer and 2 foreground layers. If you want, there can be just 1 also, and you just need 3 PNGs, and the Vision Pro UI will make it 3D on its own and cast shadows and light as required. The window materials are made to suit any kind of environment and should be usable and legible anywhere and at any time. Specular highlights and shadows on the UI make them feel more realistic. Avoid opaque windows unless needed. And there's no dark and light UI in Vision Pro. The materials just adapt to natural lighting conditions as required. The buttons usually use a lighter material to show that they're closer, and make sure you do not stack up a light material on top of a light material because it might be difficult to read from. Rather, if you want to stack light materials on top of light materials, you can put a darker background to do that. Font has been also changed, so to make sure that the text is legible, body text is now shifted to medium weight from regular weight, and the title text is now bold instead of semi-bold. Next is a very interesting topic of vibrancy, and I love this feature. Vibrancy helps the text to be always legible. It helps the UI and the text to take on the colors of whatever is in your background, which helps make the UI more usable and accessible. You'll see it in the example right now. Whenever you're using colored text on top of this glass material, like green or red, whatever, it might be very hard to see because of the always changing lighting behind your UI. Instead, rather use like a colored background and white text on top of it. Make sure you keep your content always in your field of view. Avoid placing things too far up or too far down. Rather use the left and right space because it's easier to move your head left and right than up or down. Then they talk about how big a button should be in case of Vision Pro UI. So make sure whatever kind of button you're making, that it's at least 60 points in height and width so that it's easily accessible and clickable. The button itself could be smaller, but make sure that the tap target area is at least 60 points by 60 points. And if your button is smaller, make sure you keep the space between different elements or like different buttons enough so that it can accommodate that 60 point tap target area. Since there is no mouse on the screen or you're not actually touching the interface using your fingers anymore, it is very important that you give feedback on your UI whenever you're doing any kind of action on the UI, because otherwise the user wouldn't know if your eye tracking is working correctly, you're pressing the right button or not. So you need to have hover interactions, you need to have tap interactions, active states and default states. These are very important in this. Use system components as much as possible because they're very highly optimized for this whole UI. Apple has provided a UI kit for this, and I'll be showing you where you can find that on Figma community at the end of the video. So keep watching till the end. The tab bar, which used to be on the bottom of your phone, has been moved to the left side of the UI. And if you have more nested navigation menus, they can be shown as sidebars. Ornaments are basically an additional set of controls that you can have on your spatial app UI. So they are basically additional contextual controls which can be on the bottom. So they have made a specific bottom component which can house all your contextual actions, and all this stuff has like a predefined position because that way the user experience is going to be consistent throughout all the apps on Vision Pro, which is really important. And lastly, they talk about modals, which when opened, the main window gets pushed back a bit and the modal fades in front of your main UI, and the main UI while moving backwards is also dimmed a bit, and the modal is at the same Z position as the main window was, because that way your eyes do not have to shift focus every time you open a new modal to do anything. And the last but not the least video which I'm going to talk about is design for spatial input. So holding your hands out in the air for too long can cause fatigue. So using eye tracking and just pinching your fingers to select is much more comfortable than flailing your hands in the air. Instead of using your actual hands to tap on the keyboard, or like using eye tracking to select the keys and then pinching to tap to type on a keyboard, you can also use your voice, select a text input and speak to type it out. A keyboard and a trackpad can also be connected with a Vision Pro to use them normally. Then again, they talk about making sure that you place your component where it is comfortable for your eyes. And the center is obviously the most comfortable place, and make sure that all your UI elements is placed so that it is very natural for your eyes to move around the whole UI. Keep the interactive content at the same depth so that your eye does not have to again lose focus again and again to like look at different windows. Keep the windows at like the same depth. And the next point was something completely new that I did not know before this, but basically they're using rounded shapes all over the UI because rounded shapes guide eyes to the center of that shape, and that leads to more accurate eye tracking and selection, whereas sharp shapes guide your eyes to the edges, which might lead to worse eye tracking or like misclicks. This was so interesting. I did not know about this. And also don't forget to use generous padding for your elements and centering the elements inside the container. Avoid things that might draw your eyes to the edges like drop shadows or borders. Hand gestures are the primary way to interact except for your eye tracking. These are few of the most important hand gestures that are already built into the system. Make sure that whatever hand gestures you make additionally are familiar. So the unique gestures which you make should be easy and standard, which are also used and relatable to the real world, and avoid gesture conflict with the system gestures. So basically make sure that your gesture is not too similar to the gestures that already exist in the system settings. The gesture should be comfortable and shouldn't be triggered easily by mistake by the user. And also do make sure that you think about how someone with a disability can perform that interaction if it is something very complex. Then they talk about direct interaction. You can use hands to directly interact with the elements in front of you, like maybe using a keyboard that is in front of you in the space, or rotating a 3D model, making it bigger, bringing it closer and stuff. These are a few of the use cases that are best for direct interaction. And since whatever you're touching in a spatial environment does not give you a feedback on your fingers for real, so make sure you account for that missing tactile feedback and compensate it with visual and auditory feedbacks, like making the keyboard keys having a hover state, and then when you actually tap on it, there's an auditory feedback and the key actually moves. All these things will make your spatial interaction and experience more immersive and realistic. So these were 3 of the videos that are good enough to get you started with spatial design and designing UIs for spatial computing. But make sure you go through the full videos on Apple's website, because they have gone very in depth and they have explained everything very beautifully. You'll learn so many things with them, but these are just 3 of them. Make sure you go through all of them. I really implore you that you go through the video which talks about accessible design for spatial computing, and also sound design for immersive experiences. They are amazing. From these videos, I made a UI for Figma for Vision Pro, and this is how it turned out. You can check out the full video here, but basically this was a very good activity to explore the realm of spatial interface design, and it was really fun. I suggest that you guys also do this activity with some existing app which you really like and would like to see a version of spatial design, and this would help you get started with spatial design. And Apple has released a full UI kit containing all their components for spatial interface design, and you can check them out in the link down below in the description. It's a Figma community file, and you don't have to spend hours making all these components from scratch like I did by referencing from videos and photos and like spending hours just to get the glass material right, and like have it work for dark background and light background and like an evening background. Like, you don't have to do that, okay? You guys already have the Figma UI kit. I did this when Apple still hadn't released that UI kit, but now it's really easy, and I highly recommend that you check it out. I hope this video inspired you to get started with spatial design, and if you make something, feel free to tag me on Twitt. Oh, sorry. Now it's X. Here's my handle. Elon Musk. Anyways, you might find me posting something cool or making something cool on there too. Hope you like this video, and don't forget to press the subscribe button so that you don't miss future videos on spatial design or more videos on different kinds of design, and see you in the next one.